For Nietzsche, the concept was the same, but on a psychological level. The challenge was monumental. Unless I discover the alchemist's trick of turning this filth into gold, I am lost. The filth was his pain, his loneliness, his despair. The gold would be a new kind of health, a radical affirmation of life, not in spite of suffering, but because of it. This perspective is one of Nietzsche's most powerful and counterintuitive ideas. He teaches us that growth doesn't happen in the comfort zone, but in direct confrontation with what breaks us. Every crisis, every loss, every moment of anguish is green wood that may burn us slowly, but in the process, it purifies us and forces us to find our most fundamental strength. If this way of looking at suffering resonates with you and makes you think, hit that like button. Therefore, Nietzsche's descent into his personal hell was no accident. It was a deliberate choice, an existential necessity. He wasn't just trying to survive his pain. He was attempting to transmute it into the greatest victory of all, the ability to look at the worst life and offer and still say yes to it with all his strength and will. By confronting the abyss of his own suffering, Nietzsche forged his most famous weapon, the concept of the will to power. And here, we must correct a brutal historical error. Manipulated by his sister and the Nazis, the will to power was twisted to mean domination over others, a justification for tyranny. But for Nietzsche, its meaning was infinitely deeper. It was a struggle of an individual to master himself, to overcome his own weaknesses, and to impose meaning on the chaos of a godless universe. The will to power is the fundamental drive of all beings to expand their strength, to grow, to overcome. In a sick and isolated man like Nietzsche, this will wasn't expressed in conquering nations, but in conquering his own mind. Every page he wrote through waves of nausea and blindness was an act of the will to power. Every profound thought he ripped from his agony was a victory against nihilism, against the temptation to simply give up. This is where his idea of the Übermensch, the Overman or Superman, emerges. The Übermensch is not a racial tyrant, but the human being who has become master of himself. He is the alchemist who has finally turned his filth into gold. He is the one who creates his own values, who dances on the edge of the abyss, and who loves his fate amor fati, no matter how tragic. Nietzsche wasn't just writing about the Übermensch. He was desperately trying to become one. Nietzsche's body was a battlefield, and his philosophy was his war cry. He was living the urgency of his own ideas, while the outside world ignored him. The most important battle in the history of modern philosophy was being fought inside this frail, lonely man, a battle between an indomitable will to create and an abyss of despair that threatened to swallow him at any moment. And so, we arrive at that fateful moment in Turin. The horse, the whip, the collapse. For over a century, this scene has been seen as a definitive proof of his madness, the moment the machine finally exploded. But if we look through the lens of his own philosophy, a much deeper and more disturbing interpretation emerges. Nietzsche despised what he called the last man, the complacent human being who seeks only comfort and security, blind to the cruelty and tragic beauty of existence. That coachman, flogging the horse out of sheer brutality and indifference, was an embodiment of everything Nietzsche hated. And the horse, suffering in silence, was a symbol of innocent pain in a meaningless world. What happened in that instant may not have been a simple mental breakdown. Perhaps it was a moral and spiritual collapse, a final act of empathy so overwhelming that it broke the floodgates of reason. In a deaf world, the only possible protest was to embrace a tortured animal. Was it an act of madness, or the sanest possible act in an insane world? Was it the final surrender of his mind, or the ultimate liberation of his spirit from the chains of civilization he so fiercely criticized? We don't have the answer, but the question changes everything. Nietzsche's collapse can be seen as his last and most devastating philosophical act, a final performance where he embodied the very compassion he argued had been perverted by Christian morality. From that moment on, the prophet fell silent. The man who used words like hammers to smash old idols spent his last 11 years in almost total silence, cared for by his mother and sister. The body survived, but the mind that challenged heaven and hell had withdrawn from the world. If you want to keep exploring the most complex minds and the ideas that have defined our world, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The journey is just beginning. So what caused Nietzsche's madness? The theories are many. For decades, syphilis was the standard explanation. Others have suggested a slow-growing brain tumor. The truth is, with the data we have, we will never know the physical cause for certain. But perhaps the more important question isn't what, but why? If his condition was purely psychological in origin, as many now believe, then the conclusion is even more chilling. Nietzsche knew the risks. He wrote, "The singular danger is insanity." He knew that by descending into his own unconscious to find the philosopher's stone, he risked being unable to return. He was hunting the treasure hard to attain, the power of psychological rebirth. But to do so, he had to face the monsters that guard it. The question that haunts us to this day is, was he defeated by those monsters? Or, and this is the most dizzying possibility, did he find the treasure and realize that the only way to protect it was to withdraw from the world through a staged madness? As one of his friends who visited him wrote, "I've seen Nietzsche in states where he seemed as if he were feigning madness, as if he were glad it had ended thus." Did Friedrich Nietzsche get lost in the depths, or did he find what he was looking for and simply decide there was nothing left to say? The silence, perhaps, was his final answer. January 3rd, 1889. The great prophet of Superman, the philosopher who declared God is dead, collapses. He throws his arms around the horse's neck, sobs uncontrollably, and then sinks into a silence that would last for the final 11 years of his life. The world called it madness. But what if it was something else? What if this breakdown wasn't the end, but the inevitable consequence of a mind that dared to descend into the most dangerous depths of human existence? This isn't just a story of how Nietzsche went insane. It's the story of why he had to. No one can say he didn't warn them. Years before the collapse, Nietzsche wrote a chilling confession to a friend. "A premonition sometimes crosses my mind that I am really living a very dangerous life, since I am one of those machines that can explode." This wasn't an empty metaphor. It was a precise diagnosis of a soul under unbearable pressure, a pressure coming from all sides, from the body that betrayed him and the mind that gave him no peace. His physical suffering was a private hell. Migraines that left him blind, stomach pains that kept him from eating, constant vomiting, and chronic insomnia that tortured him. He experimented with a cocktail of drugs and sedatives, hoping for some relief, but every cure just opened a new door to more pain. Nietzsche's body was a crumbling prison, and his physical agony became the dark engine driving him deeper and deeper into himself, into the labyrinth of his own consciousness. This machine was fueled by a mind that ran at a voltage no one else could withstand. As his body disintegrated, his philosophical output became more feverish, more urgent. He knew his time was short, writing that it was possible his end would come even faster than his father's, who died at 36. It was a desperate race against the clock, a superhuman effort to wring out every last drop of genius before the darkness took him completely. But what truly makes a machine dangerous? It's not just its power, but its isolation. Nietzsche had no release valve. Every revolutionary idea he offered the world was met with a deadening silence, or worse, with mockery. He was dangerously alone, navigating an ocean of pain and brilliance with no safe harbor in sight. The explosion was never a question of if, but when. "Now I am alone, absurdly alone." This line, from one of his letters, sums up the central tragedy of Nietzsche's life. For a philosopher who dissected the human condition with such precision, his own humanity was marked by an abyssal loneliness. The same academic world that once hailed him as a prodigy now treated him as an outcast. His books, which he considered as gifts to mankind, sparked no debate, only indifference. For 15 years, he confessed, no one had discovered him, needed him, or loved him. This loneliness wasn't just intellectual. It was deeply personal. His attempt to form intimate bonds failed miserably. The most famous was with the brilliant Lou Salome, to whom he proposed marriage, confessing, "I no longer want to be alone, and I wish to rediscover how to be human." Her cold rejection left him even more devastated, deepening the sense that he was a stranger in this world, unable to truly connect with another soul. Nietzsche's genius set him apart from humanity. He saw what no one else could, and this condemned him to an existence without peers, without equals with whom he could share the burden of his visions. Do you think true genius is inevitably doomed to loneliness? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's discuss it. It's a cruel paradox. The deeper he plunged into human soul, the more disconnected he felt from actual humans. Isolated, sick, and misunderstood, Nietzsche became an island. He had no comfort from family, no stimulation from disciples, no love from a partner. He had only himself and the abyss opening up before him. And it was in this absolute isolation that he was forced to find, within his own pain, the raw material for his most radical and dangerous philosophy. Where an ordinary person would see only suffering, Nietzsche saw an opportunity. He wasn't a masochist. He was an alchemist. He believed that pain, especially the long, slow pain, which forces us to descend into our ultimate depths, was the only tool capable of forging a truly strong spirit. He didn't run from pain. He used it as a diving suit to plunge into the darkest regions of the psyche, searching for a hidden treasure. This treasure was what he called, in a letter, the philosopher's stone. In alchemy, this mythical substance turns base metals into gold.